airports run on politics. Money is nice, and we might think that money is the be-all end-all here, but actually it's politics, because who operates your airport? A city, a county, a special airport district? Well, whoever it is, that's where the airport ownership is managed, and that's where you want to focus your attention, because if you don't have the political support behind you, you're not going to get what you need for the airport. For example, the airport management, not the airport manager, but the airport owners, the cities or counties, they can stop taking grants, for example. And grants are very important to airports, because the FAA requires that when you take a grant, that you sign a document that assures, grant assurances, that you will take the, that you will keep the airport open for 20 years. So you always want them to take grants, and it's not the airport manager that has the final say in that. So that's why you have to make friends with each member of your city council, each person on your board of supervisors, or each director of your special district. And it's our job to inform the elected officials of the larger value of an airport for the larger community, as not only as part of transportation, but as an economic growth engine. And it's important to visit these elected officials. So we do it everywhere. We do it at the local level with the city and county and this, or your special district, but CalPilots also does it at the state level. And I remember visiting with AOPA's John Pfeiffer a few years ago. We visited different elected officials at the state capitol. And John later said, well, what a difference it makes if you're with me, because if he's just representing a national group, it's really good to have somebody local with you, because the elected official recognizes you as a voter, and that's really important for airports. So they also, elected officials don't always understand the value of the airport, which Gil is going to talk about a little. Do you want to talk about that now, Gil? And then we'll go on to the next part.
Yeah, one of the things that's pretty amazing is the nature of what airports are as an economic engine. Oh, there we go.
Look at that. Thank you.
Well, the team made it happen. You know, this is how airworthiness happens. You know, we got like pilots, you know, you got a problem, you ask ATC. Here we've got a team to help support. I had a copy of this and off it went to Carol, or I mean to our support, and here we go. I mean,
I just need to catch up and put it on the right slide. If you could let me know where to be.
You're good.
I think you got it, Captain Shift, right there, because one of the real critical things about airports is that they are so unique, and many of the times our elected officials don't realize their economic value. People don't realize, yes, they think, okay, as was mentioned earlier, everyone who flies an airplane is flying a jet. Well, that's like saying everybody who owns a car is driving a Mercedes or a Rolls Royce. Well, that's not true. But airports connect each other and each community to other communities in a very quick way. As Carl mentioned earlier, how he would go down and meet clients in the Central Valley to meet with them and fly back to Sacramento all in a day, instead of having to spend 3 to 6 hours driving one way and then 3 to 6 hours coming back the other way. And elected officials need to realize that value. Not only that, airports can be critical infrastructure. In case of like all the firefighters fires that are going on right now, CAL FIRE has been able to use these airports as emergency response centers to local fires. Air National Guard used local airports to be able to rescue those campers who were isolated as the fire came in. I mean, reading about some of the rescues that were affected with those Chinook helicopters last week, I guess, was pretty amazing. But that's airmanship, that's air power that is this quiet support for our society. I mean, we've, especially here in California, we've got some amazing history of what aviation has done in the past century. You know, we can think back to things like what was a Ford auto mechanic by the name of Glenn Martin, who in 1911 took an aircraft of his own design and flew from Long Beach to Catalina Island and back. Now, he went on later and came back 25 years later, flying in one of his amphibious aircraft called the Martin Clipper ship. And that represented a huge amount of industry that had grown in California. And that is oftentimes our elected officials, we the people have to inform them about what these airports do and how they are connecting our world. I mean, right now, these airports are about to be reconnected in a wholly new level with these urban air mobility technologies, these VTOL aircraft. You know, last year, CalPilots was down at Chandler Executive Airport in Fresno, and I saw one of the most amazing pictures that I'd seen of Ford Trimotors that I found was pretty amazing. There's like 8 or 9 of them. Well, the reason for that is that all the Ford Trimotors in California at that time, they'd come from Northern California and Southern California, and they would transfer there at Chandler, and then they would fly back to their respective areas. That's how air power shortened the distances of California instead of being on railroads before the highway system was built. And the parallel I'm trying to draw some 80 years later, 90 years later, excuse me, is that these urban air mobility vehicles will start being able to fly within a 100 to 200 mile radius of these bigger airports to these littler airports. There was a recent, I guess it was about 5-6 weeks ago in Aviation Week and Space Technology, there was a report of the 4 leading electric VTOL aircraft that are being built, some of them here in California, and the combined investment was over $1.2 billion. Now, you may go, okay, how does that affect California? Well, the leading firm, Joby, had raised over $720 million for its foundry, which is built or based in Marina, California. And so there's this huge economic engine. Now, for those of you who don't know where Marina is, that's in the Monterey area. It's just north of Monterey and south of all the high technology centers in the Silicon Valley. And one of their major investment partners was Toyota. So what's going on? Why is Toyota, an automotive firm, making an investment in this kind of technology? Well, they see an economic return on their investment, and much of that's going to be vetted here in California in the next couple of years. And we in California, our local airports are going to be that kind of testing ground. And we in the local aviation village, we've got a responsibility to help educate our electeds about the value of airports. I know that seems like a really big, long kind of loop about aviation, past and present and future, but that's kind of the process sometimes with politics. I know when I first began participating with Aviation Awareness Day 6 or 7 years ago and walking the halls of the Capitol, I had no idea, A, what I was doing, but B, I very quickly came to realize that many of our elected officials are very hungry for factual information and not a lot of begging for, do this for me because, but say, this is healthy for the community. This will bring new opportunities for business, for education, to help inspire kids. And that's really kind of how do we, the aviation village, help communicate that to our elected officials. That's really kind of the nutshell of what's going on. So Carol, you want to carry on?
Yes, thank you. Could you switch the next slide, please? Thank you. So to start, always work with your airport manager on a personal and professional level. And the reason for that is because the airport manager wants to keep the airport open. That's their job, to have a job at the airport. So oftentimes there's an antagonism set up between the pilots and the airport manager. We need to go beyond that because they get their direction from the elected officials. So we have to go directly to the elected officials, explain to them the value of the airport, and then they will give the airport manager better direction to take more grants and other items like that. There's also a Caltrans video called Links to Vitality, and here it is on YouTube. And it talks about general aviation airports in the state of California. And it explains, a lot of elected officials are talking in it, and they explain to other elected officials. It's a good tool for you to have to give to any elected official so that they can understand from other elected officials how important it is to have an airport in your community. And many airport managers and also elected office holders are speaking in this video, talking about how valuable it is. It's often overlooked that airports have a day-to-day stimulus to the economy, right? Not necessarily in COVID times, but business people fly in pre-COVID and eventually post-COVID to go to lunch or meetings and return to their own areas, thereby saving wear and tear on local infrastructure because you fly in and fly out. The short video that Caltrans has is relevant because, as I said, elected officials tout the value of the local airport. And even our CalPilots member from our NOS Field chapter, Rick Beach, and he's also a California Zooming host today, thank you, Rick, talks in this video about interactions with public officials in connection with protecting Montgomery Field from the Sun Roads development. That was a development that caused, they violated all the land use laws, and the top 2 floors of that building had to be removed because they didn't follow land use, proper land use rules. And because of that, the local officials were involved, and Rick was a big part of that to help the local officials see the problems, and the district attorney from San Diego County helped with that. So it was a big concerted effort with a lot of groups, and the 2 top floors of the airport, of the building, came down next to Montgomery Field. I'm also in it. I discuss various topics, including getting GA pilots to help in a disaster, which now, years later, has morphed into DART, Disaster Airlift Response Team, CalDART. So also, ultimately, when all of our other avenues of dealing with politics are exhausted, we can also turn people's heads to by having a lawsuit. Could you have the next slide, please? Thank you. This is an important aspect. The California Aviation Caucus, this is on a state level. And this is bipartisan and bicameral. That means both the Assembly and the Senate in the state of California, and both Republicans and Democrats join this. The founding chairperson was Senator Jean Fuller, and about 8 years ago in Lake Tahoe at the ACA conference, that's the Association of California Airports, she and I and John Pfeiffer, who was then with AOPA, had lunch and discussed aviation in the state. And she asked me if I thought it would be a good idea to have an aviation caucus. And I said, absolutely, that I knew the state senator that in my district, Jerry Hill, had learned to fly at San Carlos Airport. So now several years in, Jean started this when she was a senator. She's since retired. And our current wonderful chairperson is Assembly Member Jim Patterson from Fresno, whom we saw last year at Fresno Chandler at our annual meeting, or in there last year. Actually, that wasn't our annual meeting. We went to an air show. So that was wonderful. And the caucus is important because it highlights to everyone in the Assembly and Senate how important airports are to them. Ask your Assembly person or senator to join. It's a valuable step forward because it helps elected officials in both houses to begin to appreciate the airport in their district, because in all 59 districts, except one, that's San Francisco, have an airport in their district. So it's vital for everyone to pay attention to airports. The only district that doesn't have one, as I said, is San Francisco, but they have an airport. It's just in San Mateo County. So San Mateo County then has 3 airports in its jurisdiction, and they are Half Moon Bay, San Carlos, and San Francisco. So no matter what color your collar is, blue collar, white collar workers, you have a job at an airport. You elected officials need to know that the FAA grants improve runways, taxiways, etc. at airports, and are an economic stimulus to the area by having engineers, truck drivers, construction workers, etc. stay overnight, buy lunch, buy fuel, and otherwise go to stores and get sundries, whatever they might need. And this feeds money into the local economy, again, showing how important airports are. Aviation and Aerospace Days are a collaboration of ACA, the Association of California Airports, NBAA, National Business Aviation Association, AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association, CalPilots, and many other groups participate. Caltrans participates. We have this every year on the lawn of the state capitol, and it's a several-day process. One day, we all divide up into groups and we visit all the legislators. This is a cooperative effort among all these groups that I mentioned, and the teams are composed of volunteers from each of these aforementioned groups. And we knock on every door in the state capitol and either talk to the elected person or to one of their aides about the value of airports. And in the past few years, we've also given them a chart of the state of California depicting all the airports, and another chart with their district showing the airports in their district. Because many times, as Gil mentioned, we find out they don't even know they have an airport. So it's a continuing educational process, because of course, when there are elections, new people come to office, and we have to start the educational effort all over again. And I think we're ready for the next slide, which Gil is going to explain that picture.
Well, also one thing before we get to this picture, one thing I'd like to point out too is that one of the very critical things about airports is the funding mechanism of airports that is very political, but it begins at the local level. And this is the FAA Airport Improvement Grant process, whereby the FAA pays 90% of an airport improvement grant, and that the local enterprise pays 5%, and then the state also pays 5%. And I can't think of a better investment of local tax dollars. If you put in $5,000 and the federal government's going to come in and put in $90,000 for your community, that's a heck of a way of creating new jobs. And that's a very important thing to help the elected to understand, because it's a process for both the airport managers and the enterprise, you know, the city council or county supervisors and their staff to approve that. Then it also has to be vetted by Caltrans Aeronautics, because they have to sign off on portions of that, that whatever is done with the local airport meets federal standards. And then from there, it goes to the FAA for doing a grant improvement process. And I know in my own life with my EAA chapter, over the last 8 years, I've learned about what's been the airport grant improvement process out at Yolo County Airport, where my chapter got a hangar, built a hangar there over 35 years ago, almost 40 years ago now. But to see that whole process for a 5-year program that is bringing over $6 million into Yolo County with various stages of helping to improve the airport, I mean, that's a lot of jobs. And that's a lot of airport improvement that really is important for people to keep in mind that, you know, again, we the people, we have to work with our elected officials, not just over 1 or 2 years, but as Andy and Carl pointed out, building the relationships with the community and the electeds and especially the airport managers who may not be changing out as fast as the elected sometimes. But that's an important point. And back to this picture that Carol has, this was myself, Melissa McCaffrey, Carol's a little bit into pink behind the Lieutenant Governor, and the gentleman who's kneeling is from, and I forget his name.
NBAA.
Yeah, oh, I know he's from the NBAA.
Bill Denier.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. But I was showing this map. You can't quite see it. This is the aeronautical chart of California that Caltrans put out in 2008. And this one has been modified. I modified this because you can see barely around where Phil's nose is and where his chin is. But if you look closely, there's 2 concentric rings. First, there's a green concentric ring that's about 100 miles centered on San Francisco's Bravo airspace. And then there's a 200-mile circle centered around San Francisco's Bravo airspace. On the southern portion of the map, there's these same 2 concentric rings of 100 and 200 miles. And those represent the range for which these urban air mobility vehicles will be flying over the state of California within the next 5 and especially the next 10 years, where there will be what's becoming known as transportation as a service. You know how we all have become very used to using Uber or Lyft for taxi service. Air transportation is going to have a similar type of air taxi service. A good example is that right now in Sacramento, if people want to go into the Bay Area, if they need to meet with somebody like in Silicon Valley, they have at least a 2, if not 3-hour drive one way to go do that. Or vice versa, if people need to come from Silicon Valley up to Sacramento. Well, some of these craft that they're building will be able to do that journey of about 100 miles or so in an hour or less. And these craft will become certificated. There's a tremendous effort that's going on with both globally right now, with both the FAA as well as EASA to develop the regulations for meeting these entirely new types of aircraft. And it may sound kind of new for some of you. It definitely is kind of like the Jetsons, but it is definitely very much a reality that we're going to have a whole need for a whole lot of pilots in the next 5 to 10 years for these aircraft. And how do we help our elected officials understand these economic opportunities? Because it's a way that, for instance, think about of all the Fortune 1000 companies that do business, agricultural business in the Central Valley, that have needs for bringing in just-in-time personnel from either the Bay Area or the greater Los Angeles area to help work on the machinery for when they're doing harvest time, or they need to bring in a critical piece of equipment. There's a firm down in Camarillo that's called Saberwing that is developing a hybrid electric aircraft that can take off either vertically or fly horizontally. Saberwing will have its first prototype flying this year. They already have an order book for over 60 of these aircraft. And The initial carrying capacity of this bird is 800 pounds. But I recently read in Aviation Week and Space Technology that the larger versions that they will build eventually will have a carrying capacity of 10,000 pounds that can take off horizontally and land at any airport. And that's where these concentric rings are going to transform California's aviation. And that's what we really need to kind of be looking towards is, yes, we've got the challenges right now. Yes, we've got this COVID-19 stuff. Yes, we're looking at the pending furloughs of many of the Part 121 crews because of all the grounded aircraft. But eventually we will come out of this and we're going to have a very different world of economics, business, enterprise. And I believe California is going to be leading that. And it all starts at our local airports. And we each have a responsibility to help nurture these ideas to the standards of airworthiness for which all of us who are pilots, that's how we conduct ourselves. And we need to help convey that to our local, county, and state officials in the process. And it's kind of fun to do because in the journey, you kind of realize how much you've got to teach and you don't really know until you show up, because 90% of affecting the change of life is just showing up. The other 10% will handle it in the face of your presence. Kind of like when you do a pre-flight and you declare clear prop and you have no idea what the mystery of your flight will be until you land at your destination. And dealing the turbulence of politics is kind of like that. But as long as you've done a good pre-flight, know that you're adhering to the regulations and that you will be contributing to the long-term health, well-being, and vitality of the aviation community, you'll do okay. Just kind of keep focused in that. But Carol, anything else that you want to carry on with?
We're ready for the next picture. So this is another example of Aviation Day from last February. It was one of our last outings before we all became shut-ins. And as you can see, it's Gil and then Rayvon Williams. He's the airport manager at Watsonville, and he's also the president of ACA, the Association of California Airports. Then Melissa McCaffrey, our illustrious friend from AOPA, the lieutenant governor, and Andy Swanson. He's the manager of Palo Alto Airport, and then you see me. But this is an example of part of our 3-day period where we're informing the elected officials, not just the lieutenant governor, Eleni Kouliakis, but many others, all of our senators and assembly people. And that's why you need to find out who your local assembly person and senator is so that you can tell them how important this airport is to you. They want to hear from you, believe me. It's the best is a phone call, and you can find their number. I'm sure you can Google it. And then the second best is an email. The very, very best is visiting them in person, but I think we have to put that off for a little while longer. So I think that's almost all we have. Do you have anything else to add, Gil?
Not really, other than, are there some questions that may have come up?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Because
let's look.
Let's see what we can find out. And how do we get—
No questions.
Oh, okay.
But
there we blank.
yeah.
I think you did have a question.
Thank you.
If I can go back and find it here.
I think it got answered.
Oh, it did. I guess it did.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it got in. This is Mike. I posted it, forwarded it for somebody else in the chat box. He said, Joel Williams asks, consider the prospect of using GA airports for drone ports, i.e. for package delivery, good or bad?
Both. Yeah, both, because it's good because it will use the airports as it should be used as an airport, but bad because not all drone operators are aware of all the rules, and there isn't an effective way to keep drones separated from airplanes yet. So that's a concern. The FAA doesn't have a paper on that yet. So It's good that an airport is being used, and I think that will be part of the wave of the future. But it makes me nervous because there's not a good way to keep everybody separate yet.
I could speak to that if I may, Carol, because actually in June, the FAA came out with their concepts of operations for version 1, which is there's been some discussions within the UAM community, and this is part of the FAA being very cautious, crawling, and kind of saying, okay, kids, what are you going to do in the playground? How are you going to be safe? But they are creating various corridors that will be separating the urban air mobility traffic, whether it's piloted passenger traffic or cargo containers, or cargo traffic, excuse me. And one of the things that to keep in mind is that for the first 5 to 10 years, that a lot of these systems are going to be piloted. The goal is to have some levels of autonomy, if not eventually full autonomy, but with a remote pilot. But the FAA, as well as the European Aeronautical Safety Administration, are taking a very cautious view. They're saying, kids, you have to verify this first. There's a huge body of regulation that the FAA, that aviation has learned in the past century about what works, what doesn't, and let's adhere to things safely. One point to the question about drone packages, right now, for instance, you look at how FedEx uses Cessna Caravans for carrying passenger or packages to various airports around California. And I think eventually that there will be drone package delivery. Both UPS and FedEx have been granted Part 135 operations nationally from the FAA. Now it's going to be very limited for the next couple of years into the regions where they do it, but it is slowly coming out. The other thing is that there's also the growth of electric airplanes. I know there's a firm called Magnix up in Washington that's actually got a electric engine on the front end of a Cessna Caravan, and they're doing the flight testing right now to get that certified. Now, what that actually can mean is that those Cessna Caravans could be carrying passengers from small GA airports that have a 2,500, 3,000 foot runway to the urban centers. And a Cessna Caravan, if they're doing it electronically with a battery or hydrogen fuel cell, will probably be able to reduce the fuel operating cost by at least 50 to 70%, possibly more. In addition, if you look at what the cost is of changing out a timed out turbine on the front end of that Cessna Caravan, you're looking at close to $1 million. And Magnix is looking at being able to price their re-engineering of that certificated airframe at under that $1 million price point. And so there's some important things that are coming, but that's what we'll see in time. Yes, Carol?
Thank you, Gil. We have another question, and then it's going to be time for Jolie to tell us about our prize.
Oh,
so
excellent.
the other question is, are there any town halls coming up to meet the caucus member? No, not exactly, but you can always Google your local officials. You should start with your city or county people, whoever owns your airport, and then also move to your assembly member or senate and call each one up and tell them how important the airport is to you and why. And is there a second question? Paul, do you see a second question?
Yeah, there's another 2 questions. One from Fed Fourchet. Will fixed-wing electric charter aircraft get certified sooner and operate cheaper than vertical takeoff aircraft? And if so, they need airports where vertical takeoff do not.
That's a good question. There's right now globally, there are over 250 different VTOL aircraft and hybrid electric aircraft systems that are under development. And which one's going to come first is anybody's guess at this point. My personal guess is because of the complexity of the VTOL aircraft, those are going to come a little bit later than fixed wing electric aircraft. I know that up in Vancouver, Magnix has actually put an electric power plant on the front end of a Beaver amphibious aircraft. And they're flying that bird right now for testing to do air taxi service within the Vancouver area. So given that evidence, my guess is that the fixed wing aircraft that are existing airframes that get certificated electric power plants will come into service sooner than the VTOL aircraft. Plus,
Gil, you also have a question, but finish your answer, and there's another question when you're finished.
Okay, so that certificated fixed wing aircraft is a known quantity, will be flying in the national airspace like it would if it was a piston or a turbine aircraft. And so the FAA is kind of comfortable with that because they know if somehow the battery stops, it still has the wings that it can fly on and glide to a safe landing. Where with a VTOL aircraft, there's a real concern about, okay, what happens if your electrons stop flowing? How is this aircraft going to auto-rotate and safely land? Or will it pop its parachute? These are questions that are being rigorously vetted by both the FAA and EASA. But next question.
The other question was wondering if GA might get in the way of all these great improvements and be seen as an obstacle rather than being symbiotic and synergistic.
I think that depends on the point of view, but I think that GA has a tremendous depth of resources and contributions that will be enhanced by these new technologies. I think that, yes, we are going to see hybrid electric and electric aircraft. The piston aircraft are still going to be around for a long time, but these airframes that we have, there may become certificated power plant changes that may bring out new changes. I know that there's a group of people down in, I think it's Hollister, that have actually taken a Piper Mirage, put an electric power plant on the front, and they're using hydrogen fuel cells to spin the propeller electronically. And yes, it's an experimental aircraft, no question about it. It's an experimental power plant. But this is the kind of technological innovation that is evolving rapidly and that I think will really enhance GA in many ways. There's how it's going to unfold is anybody's guess, but I think it's a fascinating and exciting time parallel to what aviation went through in the 1920s and the 1930s, where you look at how Charles Lindbergh purchased the Spirit of St. Louis, NX-211, down from Ryan Aviation down in San Diego, flew that around the United States, and eventually, got used to the airplane, because he picked that up in, I think it was March, maybe April of 1927, and then flew across the Atlantic Ocean within 60 days. Now that's pretty amazing, because that went from, I see I'm about to get cut off. Fine, okay, guys.
Thank you, Gil. We need to have our prize, and Jolie is going to give it. Thank you, Gil.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm the California Vanna White today. So we have a Lift Aviation knee board that was donated for this door prize for a member. It's a wonderful knee board. It's leather. It has multiple features. It is, woo, you can't really see it there. It's really a wonderful donation from Lift Aviation. And that our lucky winner is Andrew Pomeranz. So Andrew, I sent you an email, and congratulations on winning the Lift Aviation knee board. Please remember, if you're not a CalPilots member, it's not too late to join. We're having lots of new members come on board, and I'm adding them to our lists. We need your help. Together we can do it all. Thank you so much.